Welcome to the Equipped Disciple channel. My name is Rick McClatchy. I will be your host. We are here to be and to make disciples of Jesus, and we do that through daily devos, through Sunday sermons, and through other discipleship resources. We are here to equip you to be an equipped disciple. Welcome into another day of your daily devos. I'm Pastor Rick, and I'm here to talk you through some devos on Genesis 32 verses 24 through 32. This is a story about Jacob wrestling with God. What does it mean for us? Are there any applications, any principles that we can draw from this? I think it's good to read the historical account, not just to remember the historical account, but like what are the lessons God wants to teach us through these things? And so let's jump right in. If you'd be so kind, just like the video for me. That would be super cool. It helps YouTube know that it's worth watching and that other people should watch it too. So that'd be awesome. If you want to share it with someone, that's great too. Awesome. Here we go. Verse 24, Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he could not defeat him, he struck Jacob's hip socket as they wrestled and dislocated his hip. Even with his hip dislocated, then he said to Jacob, "Let me go, for it's daybreak." And Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." He's being pretty fierce. He won't let go. He's like, "All right, I'm in this. What's your name?" the man asked. "Jacob," he replied. "Your name will no longer be Jacob," he said. "It will be Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he answered, "Why do you ask my name?" And he blessed him there. So he didn't get to know. He didn't get to know. How rude. No. So he's wrestling with God. And I think, one of the things that I noticed here is just this whole idea of until daybreak. So that means it's all night. It's in the dark. And also to put it in the context of what Jacob is facing in this little time frame is tomorrow he's going to run into Esau. Like he could be going to his impending death, right? We talked about this in yesterday's devotional about how he humbled himself before the Lord. And he was like, "God, you're everything for me. Like I was nothing. I mean, I came across this river with just my staff. Now I'm coming back loaded up, 2 full camps, and so he's just like, "God, you're so good to me. I don't deserve it. I'm not worthy of this, but you told me to go. You told me that you would prosper me." And so he's like really leaning on the promises of God and on what God told him he would do. And he's like, what's going on, Lord? How is this going to go? What am I supposed to be doing? And so he ends up wrestling with God because he had, this is his third and final encounter with God, like on that physical side of things. So you have, at Bethel, he encountered God. And so here we're just seeing that God, and then we had Mahanaim, the 2 camps where he encounters the angels there. And now we have this one. And so it's either an angel or it's a theophany kind of thing, or a Christophany, where it's a pre-incarnation appearance of Jesus. The Bible does not specifically tell us, so it's open to a little bit of interpretation. And I don't know that it's a gigantic difference one way or the other. The person speaks basically as God, and so I lean towards it not just being just an angel. But he wrestles with him. And I think that there's, without being too like allegorical or metaphorical in interpreting the scriptures, I do think that there's a lesson for us to learn just about the concept of wrestling with God. That our relationship with God is not necessarily intended to just be easy, free-flowing, whateversville. Because how many of you would know that sometimes the things that God tells us to do, the things God requires of us, are really, really challenging, really, really frustrating, really, really not what I want to do. And so there's this dynamic that comes into play where we have to surrender our will to God's will. And sometimes that requires some struggle. Sometimes that requires even some internal wrestling with ourselves. And why is that necessary? And so it's pretty cool that God is a God that's okay with some wrestle. I mean, if you go to Psalm chapter 88 and you read this whole psalm, and I always describe it like this. The writer of that psalm, he started out depressed. He was depressed in the middle, and he ended depressed, and he never recovered from it. He never recovered from it in that psalm. We do know that later he served in the house of the Lord as a worshiper. So we know that big picture, long term, he recovered from that season of depression, of frustration, of challenge with God. But I love that God allowed that chapter to stay in the Bible, because it helps us to see that serving God doesn't have to be all cupcakes and rainbows as far as how we feel. We can actually feel a little bit challenged, or a lot of it challenged, by what God's asking us to do and how things are going and the circumstances we're facing. I mean, Jacob is literally facing the opportunity that he might die the next day. And he's trying to have faith in God. He's trying to have confidence in him that he's going to deliver on the promises that he said he would. And yet, pretty convinced his brother with 400 men are on their way to wreak some havoc on them. So he wrestles with God. He won't let go, so much so, all the way until daybreak. So it's like wrestling with God in the season where you can't see what's going on. You can't see the answer. And then as daybreak comes and the answers begin to become more obvious, more apparent, then the wrestling can come to a stop, because then you're kind of in the know. So I already said this is a third and final physical encounter that Jacob had with the Lord. And he gets his name changed from Jacob, the supplanter, the deceiver, now over to Israel, one who has struggled with God, because you struggled with God and with man, and you prevailed. And so Jacob's a strong man. He's got an ironclad will in him, but he definitely did not leave the encounter with God unmarked, because it says he dislocated his hip and he had a limp for the rest of his life. Not exactly the, being marked by the Spirit of God that we like to talk about, right? We like to talk about when you're marked by the Spirit of God, you're made stronger, you're made healthier, you're whatever you might expect. Israel was actually marked in a way that caused him to limp for the rest of his life. Jacob then named the place Peniel, for I have seen God's face. I have seen God face to face, he said, and yet my life has been spared. And the sun shone on him as he passed by Peniel, which is basically just another form of Peniel, and limping because of his hip. That is why still today the Israelites don't eat the thigh muscle that is at the hip socket, because he struck Jacob's hip at the thigh muscle, the hip socket at the thigh muscle. And that just shows that the importance of remembering this encounter of one of their fathers in the faith, remembering that struggle with God, remembering that tenacity to hang on until morning, to not give up when it's dark, but to stay all the way until the daytime. I just think that there's a powerful word in there for you and for me to hang on and keep on stay tight with the Lord until there's that break of day, until you see a change. Wrestle with the Lord. Don't be afraid to ask the hard questions. Even at times when you're disappointed with God. There's a book by Philip Yancey called Disappointment with God. And one of the end phrases in the book is this: I would rather be disappointed with God than disappointed without God. Because I think regardless of what you believe and who you follow, disappointment is going to come. That's an unavoidable reality. But we can stay and remain in the presence of God as we deal with
that disappointment. Hope you're encouraged today to wrestle, to stay in there with God, to not be afraid to ask the hard questions, to not be afraid to confront, to not be afraid to ask God, what is your name? How do you reveal yourself to me in this place? A lot of commentators believe that God didn't give him his name because he didn't want Jacob to get all cocky and be like, yeah, I outlasted, whatever. So there you have it. Coming face to face with God and yet not dying from it and having your name changed, your whole identity. And I think that that's something for us as well, is that when we truly encounter God, like the very structure of our identity is changed. So with that, God bless you. Have a great day. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you tomorrow.